Welcome to Getting Sketchy Live, brought to you by thevirtualinstructor.com. And now, let's get sketchy.
Hello there, everyone. Matt here with thevirtualinstructor.com, and welcome to Gettin Sketchy Live, the greatest live broadcast in all of YouTube. And if you're watching this live, I want to just thank you for being dedicated to your own art creation, because tonight is an important show. Even though we're not going to draw or paint, it's very important because we're going to be critiquing and looking at the artworks that we did from this season. We're going to talk about the things that we think we did well. We're also going to pick our favorite drawings from the season, and we're glad that you're along with us. So tonight's going to be a great learning experience. And I want to just be clear, when we're critiquing artwork, whether that be in a college environment or a high school classroom or here on Getting Sketchy, or even part of the Members Minute, which is part of the membership program, you can learn from the critiques of the artworks of other people. It doesn't have to be art that you created. A lot of people think that when you're doing a critique, it needs to be the artwork that you created. And that's not the case at all. We learn by looking at other people's artwork and taking away what they did well and learning from their mistakes. And it makes us a better artist overall. So don't turn that dial just because we're not drawing tonight. I don't even think anybody has a dial. Probably most of you don't even know what a dial is. But don't turn away from this. Watch this episode because it's going to be very beneficial to you. And like always, I'm joined by Ashley, who's sitting over there. How are you doing this evening,
I'm
Ashley?
doing great, Matt. Thanks for asking. I hope you folks are doing well, and I'm glad you're here. We've looked at the artwork that we made over the last season, and I'm really excited to talk about it. So I guess we'll go ahead and get into that. It was a lot of variety in subject matter and the way we handled the subject matter. Choices on media and paper that maybe was more or less appropriate. So those are the kind of things that I'd like to talk about tonight.
Yep, and we're going to get into that stuff in just a minute. But I'd like to remind you, if you're new to the channel, if you haven't done so yet, make sure that you like the video if you like this kind of stuff, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It's completely free to do that, of course. And if you want to take your drawing and painting skills to another level, then you've got to check out the membership program over at thevirtualinstructor.com. There is so much content there that you cannot watch all the videos within 1 year. I challenge you to do that. There is so much content. The membership program has been around since 2012.
Wow.
And there have been weekly videos added to the program since then. So there's a lot of content. We have courses on pretty much every medium, subject matter you can imagine. We do weekly live lessons. After this, we're going to be continuing with our line and wash live lesson series. And there are weekly critiques as part of the Members Minute and the year-long curriculum for visual arts teachers. There is so much there for you to learn and discover. If you want to learn more about the membership program, there's a link in the description below this video. You can go check it out for free for a week. And then we also offer a 30-day money-back guarantee after that. And it's very, very inexpensive. So link in the description below for that. Also, if you want to get on our mailing list and check out 3 of our course videos and ebooks for free, there's a link in the description below for that as well. And I've also included links to some of our popular courses that are relevant to the Gettin Sketchy drawings that we're going to look at in just a minute too. All of that is in the description below this video. You can check it out whenever you want to. All right. Hello to everyone in the chat box. I will remind you, if you are watching this live, that there is a chat box. You can post questions and comments. If you do have a question or comment that's directed at Ashley or I, we would love for you to use the super chat function. It does cost a little bit of money to you, but it helps out the channel and it makes your comment or question very prominent in the chat box. You can also put your comment or question in capital letters, and if it's a good comment for us to respond to, then we'll respond to it.
Yeah.
And we'll answer your question. All right. I think we're ready to get into this. I apologize for the screen right there, but I'm going to be working on a screen tonight as we talk about the artworks. So for those of you who don't know, this season, Ashley and I chose our own subjects, our own materials, and we just drew what we wanted inside of that 45-minute time span. And it was so nice to do that, don't you think?
Not to be tethered to the wheel.
Tethered to any wheel or any game show. Or
Yeah, that's all right. Those previous seasons were a lot of fun. They were a little bit risky because we didn't have full control of our subject or necessarily our medium. But it was a little bit was nice to take a break and make all the decisions like you guys do when you're choosing what you want to draw and what you want to draw with.
Absolutely. And I see someone said, too much yak yak. Have fun. The whole night's yak yak. So if this is too much yak yak for you, good riddance. Good luck to you. All right, let's go ahead and switch over and get into this critique session. All right, so we're going to start with the first artwork of the season, and Ashley did that.
This is my first piece, and it was an architectural piece with a little bit of a low angle looking up at a couple of domes. One of those domes is in the background. It's very, very light, and that's part of what originally attracted me to the subject matter was the atmosphere, the sense of heavy atmosphere between the forward building and then the one that was just kind of disappearing into the mist. So I worked on charcoal, with charcoal on white paper, and I think that was a good material choice for the subject. But I thought about this piece after I had completed it because there was some things that I didn't like about it, and I think it was partly due to the atmosphere that actually attracted me to the piece in the first place. So. Oh, we've got a super chat, Matt. Super chat.
All right, we got to take a second and have the cheer.
That's right.
Yeah. Thank you, PJ Hall. And PJ says for teaching me how to critique. I love your gentle way review for teaching me how to critique. I love your gentle way review.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, PJ. We really appreciate it
and your support. So let's see. So yeah. What I think attracted me to was the atmosphere, but it also killed the intensity of light a little bit, the direction of light. And after I was finished drawing it, I realized that we're looking at pretty much rectangular prisms. You know, there is a dome on top of this building, but the two sides are split right down. The two visible sides are split right down the middle with a corner or an edge. And were I to do it over again, I would make one side or the other either lighter or darker, just to create a little bit more of the overall or average difference in the values. And I think I could have still retained that heavy atmosphere by having the faded out dome in the background. It's just pretty much just a curved shape. But I believe that if I would have gotten a little bit darker on one side over the other, maybe had to lose some of those details. I think I got a little wrapped up in the details, and I lost what might have been more of a sense of light, or just didn't add it in. And of course, you know, that was my purview to do so. We don't have to copy our references exactly. And so if I were to do this one again, I would go ahead and make one side, probably the side that Matt was marking across, the left side of the building, just a little bit darker. I think it would have probably contributed to a better sense of balance too, since there is that dark element way over towards the right edge of the page. So those were some things that didn't work for me after I made the drawing, and I think that this is probably my least favorite drawing for myself of the season.
Okay, well, great one to start with, right?
Yeah. All right,
Ashley's least favorite one. Charcoal is a medium that can be difficult to control in theory, but it's very forgiving. So we can continue to make adjustments to it. And, you know, we had a 45-minute time frame for this. So I think with more time, there'd be more adjustments made to it. But in all fairness, the image that you're working from, it was kind of a smoky, I hate to say smoky, but kind of a foggy day.
It was very foggy, very heavy atmosphere.
And when you have that kind of imagery, the shadows and highlights the contrast is not as strong between the highlights and shadows. So it can be a little bit difficult to pinpoint exactly where a defined light source is. And that makes it a little bit more difficult to determine which side needs to be the shadowed side and which side needs to be the highlighted side. And I bet you anything, I don't remember the reference completely, but I bet both of these planes were probably similar values.
They were similar. So that was an area where I would have, or should have, in my own mind, deviated a little bit from the reference. I think it would have added something to the piece.
And also you're doing architecture, which would be more of a precise type of subject matter, typically, with a medium that is a little bit less precise. But you can get some really nice atmospheric effects using charcoal in this manner.
Yeah, that's why I chose it. I can't remember what the size of this piece was now. I think I went a little bit larger than we sometimes do, but maybe it wasn't large enough for the medium.
Yeah, I think it was about 8 by 10. I don't think it was very big. But
it needs to be, it can't be too big, just to fit under the equipment and the camera, but maybe I could have gone just a bit larger.
But what I do like about this piece is the composition. You did decide to put things a little bit further to the left instead of directly in center, which made the composition a little bit more interesting, making it a little bit more asymmetrically balanced instead of being approximately symmetrical if it was in the center. And I do like this dark element down here, as you already pointed out, kind of anchoring that area down there in the bottom right-hand corner.
I like the repetition of shapes too. I mean, there's like 3 different sized domes in there, even if one is mostly overlapped by the medium-sized dome. So that was something that can contribute to harmony in your artwork when you have a repetition of something. And in this case, it was that dome or curved shape. And it stood out pretty well in contrast, I think, to some of those straighter lines below the domes. So that's a positive, at least for my reference selection here.
Very good. And I see that there are a couple questions about where do I sign my art? Well, that's different for every artist, and it's really different for every piece that you create. But if you want to learn more about signing your art, because that is a subject that I can't just like give you a quick one sentence answer. But I did make a post about it on the website over at thevirtualinstructor.com.
Very thorough.
It's very thorough. So if you just go over to the website at thevirtualinstructor.com, use the search function, and just type in sign art, I'm sure that lesson will pop up, and it will tell you absolutely everything you need to know about signing your artwork and probably a little bit more. All right, so let's move on to the next piece.
All right, let's go to number 2.
The next piece was mine, and I did a lighthouse with pastels. I love working with pastels, as probably a lot of you know. One of the things I like about pastels is that you get quick color and value information on the surface. So it really lends itself really well for Getting Sketchy, because we only have 45 minutes to create an image, and it can be difficult to create a full range of value in that time period and also get a lot of variety in color. But when we're working with pastels, we can kind of do that fairly quickly. I used pastel matte paper for this image, and I used only stick pastels for this. What I like about this piece is the vibrant color and the contrast between the colors. The reds on the lighthouse are contrasting with the greens in the grasses. And if I remember correctly, I think I bumped up the color of the grass a little bit more and brought out a little bit more green than what was in the reference. And I like the kind of the vibration between those colors that happens. I also like the kind of rhythmic movement of the clouds in the background, that kind of a consistent diagonal that goes across there that breaks up the space behind the lighthouse. I'm not sure how I feel about this dark area up here in the corner. I know why I have it. This is a cloud. And I think I put it up there to make sure that I had a little bit of something up there. Without it, it feels maybe a little heavy at the bottom. I think I could probably have exaggerated that a little bit further and maybe brought that out a little bit further as well. I also see very clearly that I have spit marks.
Is that from blowing on the pencil?
I think that's from blowing on the artwork. Those would have eventually went away, but I think I photographed the artwork before the spit marks dried. So if you are spitting on your artwork, before you photograph it, might be a good idea to let your saliva dry completely. I like some of the areas of the painterly marks in here, especially with that window, this window, and the side of the lighthouse. I don't like the lack of variety in strokes in the grasses. I feel like this is kind of the same width of stroke, and with a little bit more time, I probably would have softened up some of these transitions. Let me get rid of some of those red lines so you can see. You can see we kind of go from a green to a darker green pretty abruptly, and I don't think that would naturally happen. Same thing with this kind of grouping right here. Maybe a softer transition, maybe a little bit of a softer line, a little bit more variety in the line. I do like the fact that I've got a little bit of rhythm that's created there by similar directional
I like
strokes.
the direction of the grass. I think that works well. And the grass on the left leads us back into the lighthouse. So similar to the clouds, they bring us back over to that side of the canvas once our eyes wander to the left. So I think the directional strokes work even if you feel like you could use more variety in their widths.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think I have a little bit of a value problem. And it's not its value as in darkness or lightness of color. And I think that problem area is right here. I'm going to go ahead and say that I think this value and this value are pretty much the same. We'll find out in just a minute, but first we'll make sure everybody's happy. We need to have value contrast, especially when we want things to look like they're coming towards the viewer and we want things to look like they recede. Well, the sky should be receding and the lighthouse should be coming forward. So I probably should have made this whole area a little bit darker or this area a little bit darker so there's a little bit more contrast.
Separate them.
And just to test that real quick, I'm going to duplicate this layer and I'm going to use the camera raw filter and we're going to take the color out of this image completely. And so we're only left with the values, the darkness or the darks and the lights. So to do that, I'm using the camera raw filter in Photoshop. I'm just going to take the saturation completely out and take the saturation completely down. And you can see what I'm talking about now.
They're pretty close together.
They're pretty close. This value and this value are pretty close. There's a slight difference, but I would probably want that to be a little bit more contrasting.
More like on the other side of the lighthouse.
Right.
The gray that we see that was the blue sky right above the grass on the right.
Right. And here too, where it's light and dark. Even though this is a light blue in reality, you can see how dark that value is.
Matt, we have another super chat.
Oh,
it's from
awesome.
June. June says, love you guys, and you make my Wednesdays a joy. I have grown and learned so much. Well, that's wonderful to hear, June, and thank you very much for your support and for the super chat. So we're glad to have you here tonight, and as always.
Yeah, and it's time for a cheer for that. That cheer is way too long.
We need to add something, like something coming out of our mouths while we chat, like moths or something coming out of our mouth. Mix it up a little bit, you know?
All right. So that was my first piece of the season. One more thing.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you have some orange in the grasses?
Yes.
I thought so.
I have some burnt sienna.
You've used every primary and every secondary color in here. It's almost the entire color wheel in there, which usually I try to steer clear of, but it works in this piece just because I think just a few colors really dominate, you know, the green and the blue probably and the red, but Matt actually has every primary and secondary in here. So quite a wide palette.
Don't want to leave anybody out, you know.
That's right.
One more thing I want to say about this piece is need to be careful with the edges, getting stuff too close to the edge of the picture plane. I don't think that's too big of a deal, but I do like what's happening here. This is a little bit too far close to the edge, and I think that's a little too close to the edge. Ashley, got anything else to say about the...
Not really. I don't, and by the way, I don't really mind that darker area up in the top left corner. That didn't register with me as a problem, or like my eyes weren't drawn to it. In a too much or in an unusual way. So works for me. Balances the piece.
All right. Next piece of the season was done by Ashley, and that is the toothbrush.
All right. So this was my second drawing, and it's of course, obviously in graphite. So I was still working in grayscale pretty much at this point in the season. And this one I wanted to try to show a really common object that we're all used to seeing and familiar with from an uncommon point of view or perspective. So this was a photograph that I took myself from slightly below the head of the toothbrush. I tilted my camera a little bit just to make more diagonals out of the background. I thought that would add a little bit of extra interest. And of course, some of those diagonals in the background, they intersect right behind the brush part of the toothbrush and the toothpaste. So those lines are leading us to where the top third and the left third of our canvas intersect as a focal point. So I thought that worked out pretty well compositionally. I also enjoyed trying to capture the difference in surfaces in this piece. You know, there's a shiny surface that the toothbrush is resting on, and we can see a little reflection there. The toothbrush itself kind of like a plastic and rubbery material. The bristles have a lot of light and dark marks really close together to create a rough texture. And then the toothpaste itself is kind of smooth and shiny. So that was one of the challenges, is to try to capture the different subtle differences in some ways, gross differences between textures that are right up against each other. So I was really happy with how this piece came out in the 45 minutes that I had to draw it. The value range is wide, and I thought that was good. Finally, I felt like I was starting to draw lighter and lighter. And I pride myself on being a heavy-handed artist that doesn't mind getting dark. So I got dark enough in this one to satisfy myself in terms of my range of value. This is the only piece that I've drawn on any Gettin Sketchy that I actually drew on some more later on. So I kept this piece out for a while after I took it back to my house and just looked at it. I would walk past it and look at it. And then I actually did a little bit more work of in the lines. So some of those grid lines in the background, those are like tiles. I felt like the line just to the left of the toothpaste, it's pretty light. Yeah, that was really light. So I actually just did some finger smudging on that just to satisfy myself. Probably about 3 or 4 days after I had completed the drawing. So this is the only one I've ever touched or touched up after the show. So I really like this piece. I think maybe I should draw more bathroom and kitchen objects, because they're strange. They're all very strange shapes and forms that I find myself attracted to, not because of the objects that they are, just because of the random unusualness of their form. So really enjoyed drawing this piece in the moment, and liked looking at it ever since. So let's see. I feel like the grid pattern in the background, because we're looking at the toothbrush, it's such an extreme angle, looking sort of down the toothbrush, and the handle just fades out of focus. I feel like that grid pattern created by the tiles added some stability to the composition. So that's working for me. That was working for me.
Yeah, I really like this one compositionally, but before we go into this one, got a couple of things. First of all, Jan says 9 out of 10 dentists think this is the best artwork of the season. So I like that comment.
Yeah, that's great.
They probably do. And the second thing I'm going to say is next season, Ashley will be drawing a toilet.
Our mutt.
Or, yeah. It's not even a drawing.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think compositionally, this is a really good piece to look at, because there's a lot of things that are going on here with the composition that the reason why this piece is successful is for a couple of reasons. One, the composition. 2, the range of value and the different textures. So Ashley kind of talked about that, but this is an example of where you can have a very normal, everyday subject and see it in a dynamic way because of the composition. And Ashley pointed out right at the beginning the intersecting lines that happen up here. There is a theory called the rule of thirds, and it's really not a rule. It's really more of a theory, but it's based on the golden mean or the golden proportion, which is a little bit more mathematically based, but the rule of thirds is a little bit easier to understand. And basically, if we subsect our surface, our picture plane, whoops, we're going to find that
that's a little
toothbrush.
sneak peek there.
Got a little ahead of ourselves there. If we subsect the picture plane into thirds, so
like a tic-tac-toe board,
kind of like a tic-tac-toe board, we have these intersecting points that occur, and we also have these horizontal and vertical lines. These lines are good places to put things like horizon lines or edges of things. And these lines are also good to place areas of importance too, like standing people, or anything that's tall, like a pole or a lamppost.
What they really do is just help us avoid putting the most important thing right in the center.
That's
just
very
reminds
true.
us to move things off center a little bit to create movement with our viewers' eyes.
But the real money places are these intersections that happen. And if we can place focal points on those intersecting points, then we typically are going to have a much stronger and more dynamic composition. And you can see that where these lines intersect is almost directly on one of those intersecting points, which brings all the focus to that area. So these lines in the background, the grout and the towel, is working to pull our eye to the main focus of the piece. And we also have high contrast in this area. We've got dark values and light values, and they're right next to each other. High contrast is going to pull our eye to that location. And then we have 3 different textures all kind of compressed in that same area. We've got the plastic, we've got the bristles, and then we've got that wonderful toothpaste up there, which the toothpaste looks a little bit transparent. I can't remember if the toothpaste is like the transparent kind or the white kind.
Yeah.
It's got some transparent flavor in there.
It does.
With that little dark area of shadow and these strong highlights that are happening in there. Really like the variety of the texture, but I really think the strongest part of this piece is the composition. I think the composition is really strong, really well thought out.
And speaking of, Buddy asked, how long did it take to get the reference photo right? And that's, I had my subject down. I just needed to get a good photo of a composition I was happy with. And, that's where the art happens. The decisions we make sometimes before we actually start drawing is where a lot of the hard decision making and thinking happens. And so, Buddy, I would say that I probably spent anywhere between 10 and max 20 minutes taking pictures of a toothbrush. And but I did also set up lights and move the lights a little bit between photographs. So it wasn't, I didn't just set a toothbrush down and take a picture of it. There was a lot more to it than that. It's sort of the Wizard of Oz of artwork. So what would happen sort of behind the curtain that we don't sometimes see evident in the artwork. So thanks for asking and for bringing that up. That extra little bit of time that I took, taking probably anywhere from 12 to 15 or 12 to 20 photographs and setting up my own light source that I can control made a lot of the difference. And being able to capture that texture, for example, of the bristles, because it wasn't as distinct until I had put a specific light on it. Good question.
And Dale says the only thing wrong is there's no purple. And this isn't one of my drawings.
Good one, Dale.
This is actually drawing.
Matt probably sees purple in there somewhere.
Of course I see purple. There's purple all in this drawing. One last thing that I want to point out for this is, on this piece, is how the illusion of space is created with a very small depth of field. So this, from here to here, is a very short distance in reality. But because of the angle of the photograph and how close and intimate we are with the subject matter, this distance needs to be extended in some way to make the piece work. So in this area, we have high contrast, we have strong detailed and edges, defined sharp edges. And as we go back in space, the contrast is lessened and the edges become softer. And because of that little simple trick, we've got more depth in the scene, and the toothbrush seems gigantic and more important, almost like we would expect to see if we had a landscape and a huge toothbrush. It would be cool to have like little...
this could have been a Klaus Oldenburg sculpture.
It could be, yeah.
It reminds me of the spoon, the perspective of the shots of the spoon with the cherry on it.
I'm kind of seeing little tiny people all crawling all over it, like in Gulliver's Travels or whatever.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, let's move on because we're spending too much time
true.
here.
We got a lot of pieces to look at.
All right, the next artwork of the season was from me, and I did a bear and with pen and ink. And I'll be honest with you, I chose this subject in pen and ink for one specific reason. I thought this would be easy to get done in 45 minutes. And I was running out of time at the end, so I had to improvise with the rock structure that the bear was standing on. So there's definitely a strong graphical contrast between the way the bear is rendered and the way the edge and the rock is rendered. I knew I wasn't going to be able to get the cliff rendered fully, so I chose to go with more of a graphic style there, just showing a few pieces here and there, having a strong edge around here, and trying to create a little bit of flow and movement in the piece in the amount of time that I had. I spent obviously way more time on the bear, and all of those little lines of fur are what sucked up most of the time for me. I love working with pen and ink. I love working looser with pen and ink. I do think that the contrast between the way the bear's rendered and the way the mountain or the cliff is rendered, that contrast is a little jarring, but also interesting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I think in retrospect, what I would have liked to done to finish this piece completely is to take a quick little ink wash and put a quick wash in here, leaving these areas that are open with a light value. I think that would make it feel more finished. In its current state, there is a lot of white space on the paper, and I do like the composition. I like that the bear's at the top. He feels almost like he's falling over, especially that's echoed by the little pieces that are kind of falling off. So it's got a little feeling of physical movement in it. It's not just visual movement. But again, I feel like there's too much white space. I think that's my biggest criticism of this piece. It's just too much white space. Again, a little quick ink wash or a little bit more detail on the cliff, and maybe allowing this transition right here to fade a little bit more gracefully. I
think it's kind of cool
contrast.
how it just turns into just the contour.
You like
the
that?
rock at the very bottom. It's a little bit unexpected, and that is, I mean, it may be a good thing. I mean, if you didn't have the time limit, you would have probably kept going and possibly added 10,000 more marks.
That's true. 'Cause
that's your tendency to do.
That is definitely my tendency.
So this forced you to do something unexpected, and I think it creates some interest there. You do have a heavier line at the bottom,
Yes.
So that's there's less line work down there, but it's a bold line.
Yeah, I tried to vary line quality. When you work with pen and ink, you're working with line most of the time, unless you're doing stippling. So you have to make the most of the use of line, and making the most out of the use of line includes using a variety of different lines, which I like to refer to as line quality. You can have a line that's thick, a line that's thin, you can have a line that's broken, you can have a line that's a little squiggly. So having variety in the line is important.
I mean, the bear is on the edge of a cliff, so it already feels precarious. And then for the cliff to be reduced to a thin line makes it even more delicate and you would imagine difficult to balance on. So bear's in a really bad spot.
Well, I like all your comments because you're making me see the piece in a different way a little bit.
Okay.
So again, this is an example of improvisation at the last minute. This is not something that I planned. This is not how I planned the piece to be finished, but it is interesting. It is an interesting 45-minute sketch. Just getting overly critical here. My line work in the fur is hurried for obvious reasons. If I was to do this at a little bit of a slower pace, I would concentrate on consistency with the line work. There's just a few little areas where the line kind of comes out and kind of pulls back on itself, making little C's. I would prefer to have a little bit more of a crisper line there. Some people are going to like kind of that looser look, but in some of the areas, especially the dark areas, it seems a little hurried. And I would have probably taken my time a little bit more. I don't like, I need more white space. I feel like to make this piece work a little bit more, I just need a little bit more white space at the top and maybe a little bit more on the edges compositionally. And if you wanted to get really dramatic, you could really push this up to the top of the picture plane and continue the picture plane down a few more inches and continue that line straight down. And then it would appear like what I did was totally intentional. But it would kind of add to that precarious feeling there by just extending the picture plane down and bringing that line down a little bit further.
Yeah, if you're going for precarious, top heavy is the way to go. We talk about top heavy artwork being bad or imbalanced, but not all the time. Sometimes you're trying to create that feeling of unease in your viewer with your subject, and that would definitely do it.
Okay, Charles is asking, can you crop it to make the bottom have less white space?
I was trying to do that with my hand earlier to see if it worked, like if it was a square.
Yeah, if I we'll have to do it this way here. You can kind of imagine if all of this was removed, that's what it would look like. I think that the bear definitely feels more grounded. And there's less of a feeling of movement, less of a feeling of uneasiness,
Less danger.
right, when it's there. The drama is removed from that.
Yeah.
There's definitely more focus and emphasis on the bear with this bottom section cropped off, but I do think I prefer it like this than having that bottom part cropped off.
I think I agree.
All right, I think we're done with that one, huh?
Yeah, let's go ahead and move to the next one.
All right. The next
doing all
one
right
was
on time.
Ashley's, and that was the Lego Man.
Lego Man, Legozilla, I like to call him. So this was in oil pastel on black paper, and I had experimented with one brand of oil pastels that didn't go well at all. Using the yellow didn't show up well on the black paper, so I switched to a little bit better, high quality of a brand, a little softer of a stick. And I'd actually started the head, by the way, with a little bit of white underneath it, and then the yellow over that, just to give the yellow a little bit more opacity. Because sometimes the yellows in a single set of paint or other material, the yellow will just be weaker than the other colors.
Yeah, kind of transparent.
Yeah, a little bit. I found that to be true with most brands that aren't really high quality artist brands of whatever it may be, paint, oil, pastel, or otherwise. Sometimes the company just gets a little skimpy on the yellow pigment. So just a tip, if you're working on black paper with, in this case, oil pastel, you can put a little bit of a white base down underneath yellow areas. And I don't think it reads as a weak or a... Well, that bird... Really
He's flying all over the place.
Right, he wants to be talked about. He wants to be seen.
Goodness. The thing is, I got these out of order, and I'm trying to fix them, and I'm messing everything up.
Okay.
This has nothing to do with buttons, by the way.
Right, man. These are tabs.
This is me messing things up with the
clicking
mouse.
the wrong tabs. Yeah, it's not buttons tonight.
I'm just gonna not.
So
try to fix it.
the color scheme here is pretty strongly, obviously, primary, and that holds true in the background also with blue, and there's a little bit of red back there. So strong color scheme. I think that works really well. I just love drawing plastic objects. And I don't know what it is about that surface. It's kind of shiny and kind of not. So this is another plastic object, similar to my toothbrush. It's probably still on a what is it? It's like runners have a high. I was on an artist high from
You're going through a
toothbrush
phase.
composition, right? It's like I'm going to do another tilted upshot, but this time I'll lean it the other way, or So in any case, I kind of pushed that a little bit further with this piece. And again, everything's a little slanted, which creates interest. One thing about this composition that's unusual is there's no ground plane. The Lego Man is the most forward thing, and we can't really see what he's standing on. So that is kind of a no-no in art, but not as much nowadays anymore because of the precisionists, a group of artists from the early and middle 20th century that I'm a fan of. And sometimes they would sort of zoom into their subject enough that you really couldn't see the ground. You just started right on the subject itself. Is it Charles Demuth? Am I saying that right? Is that the artist that did houses and buildings sometimes? And I think he was the precisionist. I think I've got the right artist in mind. And he just kind of zoomed in where you couldn't see the ground, where the house made contact with the ground. So that really brings the figure forward. And then of course, the figure is the Lego Man here. Not a real figure. And so I'm not sure if that works for everybody, but because I was taking my photograph slightly below the level of the Lego Man, I had to make a decision. Do I want to see the edge of the table that he was standing on, or just cut that out? And I just decided to cut that out. So part of me feels like it's a little bit weird how the foot on our right just sort of ends right there in the corner. Maybe it creates unintentional weight in the picture, but I think the brightness of the head and the hands keeps my eyes from falling down there to that bottom right corner and kind of getting stuck. So I was really happy with the way this piece went overall, and the intensity of colors that I was able to get off of that black background.
Well, I really like this one, and I think that having the bottom of the Lego piece go off the bottom of the picture plane adds to the uneasiness and scariness. People are going to look at this two different ways, I think. I think some people are going to look at that and say, oh, it's a Lego man. How cute.
fun.
How fun. And some people are going to look at that and say, what in the heck? That is scary.
That's what I'm going for.
And I'm in the what in the heck, that is scary, because of a couple of things. And if you're trying to create scary drawings or paintings, you can take some notes here on what Ashley's done. First of all, there is a strong diagonal. And whenever we have a diagonal like this, especially when we see subjects that are typically upright, like we would expect the Lego man to be upright, he's at a diagonal. That means that there's some kind of movement involved, or some kind of unusual angle that we're looking at it, like your head's tilted or something like that.
It gives the effect of the shaky camera. In
Right,
a horror
exactly,
movie,
right.
Something like that.
It feels like there is something off about it. Not necessarily graphically, but there's an uneasiness about it. So I like the bottom of the feet going off the bottom, or I like the feet going off the bottom of the picture plane. I wouldn't like it if it wasn't for this strong shape up here on the upper left portion of the picture plane. That shape is helping to ground what's happening down here.
Yeah, maybe so.
So when you're trying to create visual balance in a piece, if you have something that's very heavy visually, this is heavy visually, okay? Because it goes off the bottom of the picture plane, just barely off the bottom of the picture plane. And this hand does that too. That's going to create visual weight and pull. If all of this up here was blue, this piece would feel very unbalanced and unfinished. But because we have this dark shape up here, strong contrast and value, that anchors what's happening down here, and it kind of sets up that strong diagonal that's happening right there. Another thing that makes this scary is the strong contrast in light. You've got a light source coming from maybe over the right shoulder of the viewer. We've got these strong highlights right here, but we have this really strong shadow that's happening there. And if you've ever taken a flashlight and shined it up at the bottom of your face where the highlights are coming from below and the shadows
like you're telling ghost
are top,
stories.
right? Then you know what kind of effect that creates. And in this case, the light source, I think the light source is actually coming from below.
A little bit.
You got that angle right there.
It was about the light source was about at the level of the table, so it's just slightly below.
So that's making this look even scarier because of the light source. You don't have to have the light source right above the subject. So this light source here, it's actually down here coming up.
It's another thing that's unusual because light almost always comes from above, whether it's the sun or the lights in your house. Usually they're above us. So, so I think the tilted subject and the low light and strong contrast, I think they do make him feel a little bit scary. And that's and of course he's faceless, which if we saw a smiling face on the Lego man, it just wouldn't work. I think this Lego man was gritting his teeth in the anger. The actual face that was on there, and I just had left it off. I think I might have removed it using Photoshop, so it wasn't even in our reference. So I can't remember, Matt. The face might have been in the reference that we were looking at that night, but I think
can't remember either.
It's better and more mysterious without a face. It's like it's an old sci-fi movie with a robot, Lost in Space. Kind of reminds me of the Lost in Space robot. It's kind of big and it's got those weird claw-shaped grippers, and the face is nondescript, and you can imagine it being as scary as where your imagination will take you.
Another thing I really like about this one, and then we'll move on because we got to hurry, is the looseness of the painterly kind of looseness of the application of the material. That's adding to the expressive nature of this. If this image was rendered with a very steady hand with precision, then it wouldn't have the same feel as it has. And I think the looseness, the more painterly approach is adding to the overall feel of the piece as well. All right, so let's move on now to this guy because he wants to
making his third appearance for the night, the cardinal.
Yes. Okay, so this one, I worked on Canson Mitan's pastel paper. I used the heavier side of the paper, and I used colored pencils because I thought, hey, pen and ink I wasn't able to get the pen and ink done in time, so why not colored pencils? That should be easy enough. So I had to improvise on this one as well. I knew I wasn't going to get the complete image on the surface. I knew I wasn't going to get it completely rendered like I normally do with colored pencils. So I decided to focus on the head and kind of let things kind of fade out while showing the brilliant colors that I used for layering. So you can see there's oranges and reds and purples in here. Of course, there's purples. Every cardinal's purple. Purple's up here as well. And then I added a little bit of a darker color. This is indigo blue. I think it's indigo or dark indigo behind the bird so that there was a little bit of contrast there. But this is definitely a sketch. Again, I like the flow, the diagonal. I think the composition's really nice. This branch comes across in the lower thirds. And I do like the fact that we've got a little bit of fading out that's happening here with the colored pencils. So again, I had to improvise a little bit on this one. I don't think I used black at all for this. I think I layered the black. I can't really remember exactly. But the character that emerged from the bird, just naturally, I really like that. It's not exactly like the reference. This cardinal looks a little cartoony, but it also has some really interesting colors and some interesting lines in it. I really like the way this one turned out. I know not everyone was a fan of this one because it's not the way I normally do colored pencils, but I kind of liked it. It was a little bit of a departure from what I normally do, and allowing some of this underwork to show through, I think, it adds a little bit of character to the piece.
I think people appreciate that more nowadays than in the past because they get to see the process, the stages of the process.
Yeah, in one image.
Yeah. I know an art teacher that does an architectural rendering project with the students where they have 3 levels of rendering, and it's exactly like this in effect, but with a building instead of with an animal. And I always enjoyed looking at those images. You can still see the initial drawing marks in there down at the tail. So very revealing.
I'll just point out a couple things. Honestly, there's not a whole lot to say about this one because, it is very sketchy and very loose. In retrospect, I don't like the strong highlight here. I don't know if I used white, but it kind of looks like white. I would have preferred to have maybe a lighter version of that brown there instead of white. These areas of white are fine with me, but this on the branch I think is a little too strong.
What
maybe
about in the eyes? Is that white or is that yellow?
That's yellow.
Okay,
that's actually
really the brightest spot, and it's right next to all of those dark areas. So it definitely pulls our eye to the eye of the cardinal. So that's really nice. The very brightest color there is in the eye.
Yeah. Compositionally, I like the composition, as I mentioned before. I don't really know if there's much more to say about this one because it's not fully rendered, but I do like the way the sketch turned out. All right, we'll move on now to Ashley's next one. Ashley did the cat.
All right, so Matt and I both, we just kind of went through an animal phase right in the middle of the season.
They're having all kinds of phases.
Yeah, so after the bird needs, if you're going to draw a bird, you need a cat. And that's what the cat's looking at. He's staring up at that bird and hoping he doesn't dive bomb him because that bird looked mad. So I think the cat drawing for me, it was a dream drawing. I started drawing this cat, and after about 25 minutes, I was counting on the black of the paper to do a lot of the work for me, I hoped, and boy, did it. The cat really started looking like a cat after only about 20 minutes. I thought, I'm going to have to slow down, stretch this thing out to get to 45 minutes. Of course, it was plenty to do. I was happy that the initial application of value went down as quickly as it did because I was able to focus a little bit more on the texture of the fur down in the cat's chest, more so than I thought I would have time to do. So the cat is rendered in pastel, and I was using a gray and a white, I believe. I might have had a white charcoal pencil, or it might have been all-white pastel. This is only a few weeks ago. You can tell my memory is poor.
Yeah, it's sharp.
Yeah, but there are 4 different greens in the eyes, and so I just happened to have that many and was able to capture all the variety. There was like cool green and warm green in there. And similar to Matt's cardinal, the eye in this cat was the focal point. So that's why I was didn't also render the eye in gray. So I know this is a mostly black and white image because the cat was gray and white. But I considered it a color image because I didn't just put color in the eye intentionally and leave it out in other places. That was really the only place there was distinct color. I could have probably found places to put purple, but I was doing the drawing instead of Matt, so I just stuck with gray instead. And then of course the whiskers landed nicely. I was always a little nervous when you're making marks that just have to be a singular stroke and you can't really touch them after that. You just got to get it right from the beginning. And I thought the whiskers went well. So for me, I thought this was one of the easier drawings that I executed this season, and that was all made possible by the black paper. So if you're not drawing on dark paper, I think it would have also looked good on that sort of navy colored paper that Canson makes. I want to start using that color a little bit more because it's almost as dark as the black, but it is a color. So I think I'm going to do some more drawings on my own, and maybe on Gettin Sketchy also with that very dark, almost a navy blue color, like a midnight blue color that comes in the Mitance papers. So thanks, dark paper.
Okay, lots to say about this one. But first, I think that there's a comment here by Lord Engine that I think everyone needs to hear. And their comment is, helps to see the work with no reference after the fact to appreciate it.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
I think that's very important because when you're watching Gettin Sketchy or you're watching any of the other tutorials, we have the photo reference up there for you to see. And it's amazing how many people think that you have to match the photo reference to be successful. And that's not the case at all. When you're watching us do these drawings on Gettin Sketchy, you notice all the discrepancies. Because there's going to be discrepancies.
Right.
Always. It doesn't matter how well you draw or paint or how well you see the subject. There are going to be things that aren't exactly the same as the reference photo. And no one should see your artwork right beside the reference photo. That is not how you gauge or judge the success or failure of a piece of art. It's not how well we can copy. We have machinery that can do that. We have cameras that can take photographs. We have copy machines. There's a skill in being able to do that, but that's not the merit that we find in a piece of artwork. A piece of artwork should be judged on its own outside of the reference material or outside of the reference material.
Yeah, we use all that information, or we see Matt and I see it too. We see the differences between our references and our artwork, and sometimes we, based on those differences, we make changes, and sometimes we choose not to because it doesn't seem like it doesn't matter to us, or we prefer the version that we're drawing over the reference. And that was actually my problem, I think, in the very first image, is I stuck too close to the values that I saw in the reference, and I should have changed them or pushed them a little bit further into the dark side on one side of my building. So I'm upset with myself for being too caught up in the reference in the first drawing as opposed to some of these others.
Well, going back to this piece of art, I think that that's really critical for you guys to understand, because sometimes when we're doing one of the live shows where we're drawing, people will say, well, you need to move this here, you need to, the chin's too long or whatever. And they're kind of missing the point. And we're not trying to teach you to be replicators. We're trying to teach you to be artists. And there's a difference between the two. You've got to be a good draftsman, meaning that you have to have the skills and an understanding of the material that you're using and how to use it to its fullest potential. But you also need to learn how to make decisions on what needs to stay and what needs to be removed from your reference in order to be successful. And having a time crunch helps with that. I just, I'm trying to hurry and say these things, but I think that this piece is a good example of the power of black paper. Black paper means that you're starting with the darkest side of the value scale. When we work on white paper, you start with the lightest side of the value scale, and you have to add dark values. It is very difficult, well, not difficult, it's time consuming to create an image with a white sheet of paper with a dark material that feels complete and full as far as value goes. On black paper, it's a lot easier because we see more darker values in reality than we see lighter values. And if we have a subject like this that is in strong contrast between light and dark, then black paper is your best friend, especially if you're trying to complete something in a short period of time. This is a great example of how powerful black paper is because Ashley didn't have to draw the shadows. He only had to draw the highlights and middle values that were lighter.
Only had to draw half the drawing.
Right.
They're all tints there.
And if you're drawing an image on white paper with a black media, you're drawing all of the values. Everything's drawn, and you're leaving out the light values, and there's very little places where you're going to see strong white in a piece of art. So great example of that. I love the textural marks on there. I love the feathering in the chest here that gives us a sense of texture and form. Great control of the material making these whiskers and these broken lines over here to hint at some whiskers there. This is a wonderful broken line that comes out, disappears, and reappears right here. Highlights in the eye, that area of shadow right underneath the eye. There's lots of good things to talk about in this piece. Really well done. Really like the strong contrast in the use of materials there.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, the next drawing was mine, and of course I had to do a dog. We had
a cat. We had a bird and then a cat, so we had to throw a dog in there.
Yeah, and we've got another bird coming up too.
That's right.
So I just wanted to work in graphite for once. And I had forgotten how rewarding just working in a sketching nature with graphite can be. And this piece kind of reminded me of that, how much I like just drawing loosely and quickly with graphite. This is a wonderful composition. There's a diagonal that happens here. The dog's head is tilted so that we've got a little bit of an intersection between those two diagonals. And the dog is primarily made up of lighter values, so this works on a whiter sheet of paper in a short period of time. But I wanted to make sure that there was enough contrast there so the dog stood out against the background. So I decided to put a little bit of value contrast up here and a little bit of value contrast right here. That also helps to kind of echo a diagonal that happens there. So I was really happy with this drawing. I think I tried to incorporate a little bit of variety and line quality in the areas where I had lines. Typically with a graphite drawing, we don't actually draw lines. We just create areas of contrast and value. So if I was to finish this image completely and it wasn't more of a sketch, the edge that happens right here would be determined by a value that's right here and a value that's right here. There wouldn't necessarily be a line. But because this is a quick sketch, I do have to draw a line, and you will have situations where you need to draw a line. But this is a good example of having some variety in that line so that it is not a strong edge and there's a little bit more of a feeling of form associated with it. This drawing had some challenges because the muzzle, is that what it is?
I think so.
The muzzle is coming towards the viewer. This is called foreshortening. That means the distance from here to here is shortened in your drawing because it's coming forward, foreshortening, and that presents some challenges. I'm pretty happy with the foreshortening.
You had to make a major change at some point. You had drawn this out, and this was an example where Matt looked at his reference and made the decision that it couldn't stay the way it was. It needed to be changed. So that was different than the cat in places where Matt decided he needed to work more toward the reference after judging his art halfway through.
Yes, that's a good point. I had forgotten about that. I did make a change. I remembered there being something about the foreshortening, but I couldn't remember exactly what it was. In this drawing, I had the chin coming down about right here. You can kind of still see a little bit of those eraser marks. And I discovered that things didn't match up right. I think I discovered it actually with the bottom edge of the ear and where this was located.
Okay.
I can't really exactly remember what relationship it was, but there was some relationship that was clearly off. And I noticed that I had maybe it was something out here. I can't remember. But I noticed that I had gone too far down, and that would make the foreshortening right here not feel natural or feel believable. So I did make the decision to move that up in the middle of the drawing. And when it's something that is that critical, then you definitely probably need to make that change. A lot of times we're not going to have issues that are that critical, but when we're talking about the structure of the face of the subject, that's something that needs to be altered. But even with this image, talking about making comparisons to the photo, there are all kinds of discrepancies in my drawing compared to the reference. But again, another good example, no one's going to see the photo reference. The photo reference really doesn't matter in regards to your finished artwork. The one thing that I would change about this is I want the nose to have a little bit more of a darker value associated with it, just so it stands out a little bit more. It kind of gets a little bit lost in there, even though the value is probably pretty similar to the fur tone. But I would prefer, looking at it now, to have maybe a little bit of a darker value in the nose. Ashley, you got anything to say about this one?
I thought that your commitment to making that change was really important to see. You know, sometimes we don't want to do a lot of erasing, but usually almost every time you erase, your art gets better. So just remember that when you have to undo 10 or 15 minutes of work, or maybe an hour or two of work, it's probably going to end up better the second time around. So the way Matt placed the darker marks behind the next to the head, I think worked really well. And they're probably different than I always like seeing how Matt's going to work in those areas where he sketches just a little bit of background in, similar to the cardinal, because he makes different choices than I might would have made sometimes. So I learned a little bit there too.
What would you have done differently?
I would not have been able to help myself, but to go over the very top edge of the crown and bring those. I would not have been able to help it. So, yeah. But you just stop there. You know,
the reason I stopped there,
stop at the top of the head, and that's it.
Yeah, the reason why I stopped there was to create a diagonal.
Mm-hmm. Instead of bringing those together.
Instead of bringing those
like
together.
A dark halo.
Yeah.
So.
Buddy asked, did you use fixative in the end to protect the sketch? The answer is no. I don't ever use fixative ever anymore. No. All right, let's move on to the next one. We've got two more to go. Next was the Hawk.
All right.
Sepia.
Yeah, this was the I can't remember what kind of hawk it was. Harris Hawk. It's a Harris Hawk.
Harris's Hawk.
Yeah, Harris's Hawk.
It's a weird name.
Mm-hmm. And this one was in Conte Crayon, and I used sepia, not sanguine. It's the sepia. It looks a little bit warm on the screen, but it was sepia on kind of the sand-colored mi-teinte paper. I also used a little bit of white charcoal pencil at the end. And though there was a toned surface, this one was not the same walk in the park as the kitty cat was. It was a little bit of a struggle in the beginning because of the size of my medium and the size of the paper. But the way it turned out, I think, is all right. The white speckles that we see in transition between where the stronger lights are and the strong darks, they work for me as the bumpy, warbly texture of those small feathers. And so I think the paper helped with that, the texture of the paper. That's also one of the drawbacks here is I did not intend to draw on the more textured side of the paper. And probably while I was getting set up to draw, I was talking with Matt at the same time, and it inadvertently taped my paper down on the wrong side. So
yeah, it was probably my fault.
Yeah, I'm sure it was Matt's fault. So when I started, I was a little irritated that I was working on the wrong side of the paper. Wrong for me, wrong for the size of the drawing. And I felt my temperature start to go up. I think I started to get a little hot inside. I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to save this? The texture is going to be so heavy. But I did use and bring and use blending stumps, so I was able to negate some of the unwanted texture in the bird. And then I think it worked out. Having the texture show up so heavily around my bird. And of course, I just wanted to do a little bit of sketchiness, a little bit of value around my bird. And again, couldn't help myself and still covered the entire picture plane with something. I couldn't just do a few marks of background value. But all in all, I think what really pulled this piece together in the end were the touches of white charcoal. So if I were to do something different, I would have tried. I think I would still like to redo this drawing on this slightly less toothy side of the paper. and see how it compares. Maybe worked about 20% larger as well. I don't know if the drawing would have come out any different or any better, but it would have been probably a little less tense in the beginning.
Yeah, I agree with the size of the paper assessment there. I do feel like the paper is probably small for the subject and the texture of the paper. If you worked on the other side of the paper, that toothiness wouldn't be so evident. But looking at it now, and for me, it's right up in my face. So it is like a huge drawing. So I'm overwhelmed by paper texture.
Right, Matt's got a huge screen in
For
front of him.
you, it's a little bit smaller. So the paper texture is less of an issue. But yeah, you're looking at it like this and big, the texture is quite evident. But again, with maybe a smaller tooth on the other side, that wouldn't be so much of an issue. Like Ashley said, I do like the texture, the way the texture is working to insinuate some details. And that's, like Ashley said, it's an advantage of working on texture paper. I like the movements and flow that's happening in here. It does feel like the bird is in motion. And I like this area especially because it feels like these areas were erased out.
Yeah.
And that's actually creating, you can see the color of the paper, but it's still got a little bit of material on it. So it's not exactly the same value as the background, but it's still reading as a lighter value than the values around it. I really like that area a lot.
I feel like I spent the most time on that wing. You know, 'cause that's where the light's hitting. That's where we can actually see all of the texture in a wider value range.
And I also like the fact that you included these little stringy things here. I think that adds.
That helps with the feeling of flight, I think, in motion.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. All right.
We did have a super chat from
all right.
Tanya.
Woo.
So,
Okay,
and
hold on.
Tanya says, an oil painting for Gettin Sketchy possible? That is totally possible. You know, the subject would be something that we could draw very quickly to get into the paint, but it's totally possible. Maybe a little harder to follow along, but maybe not, because we have to work so quickly on Gettin Sketchy. You might, what I mean is to say, is follow along if you don't have oil paint, but probably not so much because it's such a quick show. You could probably follow it along. And I like for people to be able to do that. I don't want our artwork to be exclusive to folks that have, you know, more unusual supplies. It sounds funny to say that because oil paint used to be the art supply, and now it's less commonly used. But you could probably follow along with acrylic paint, and I could use oil paint. And if you've got oil paint, definitely use that. So that could be coming.
Yeah, and we'll have to give signage here, of course.
Yeah!
And speaking of firsts, I decided to get a little crazy,
A little painting.
a little cray, and do some watercolor here for the last episode of the season.
Matt just tried to pick media that he couldn't finish with all the way through almost.
And, you know, ironically, this is the only one where I didn't feel hurried at the end.
Yeah, how about that?
I almost could have stopped right at the time limit. But so this was interesting because not only did I choose to use watercolor, which I'm going to tell you right now, watercolor I think is the most difficult medium to create art with. And I don't think many people know that or recognize that because watercolor is cheap and inexpensive and everywhere.
Well, you know, water is safe, and you just transfer that onto the medium also. You know, water can't hurt you, so watercolor can't hurt you, but it can. Sometimes watercolors hurt.
Yeah, and I've had plenty of watercolor paintings that I've started, and things just went south, and there was no saving the painting, and that's pretty normal. So it was a little nerve-wracking to do watercolor painting for Gettin Sketchy. Now, on top of that, I decided to make it more difficult by not drawing anything with pencil ahead of time, too.
That's right.
Starting with the watercolor. I don't know what I was thinking that day, but I'm glad I was thinking it. Because I really like the way this one turned out. And it's opened up a door for me in a different way of creating line and wash images. I have always started with a pencil drawing, always. But it became clear to me that I wasn't going to be able to start with a pencil drawing, then add watercolor, and then pen and ink and finish within an hour. So I had to forego one step of the process, and I chose the pencil step of the process. The result is the watercolor painting is looser, it's more expressive, colors are allowed to blend into one another, and that allowed me to be a little bit more creative with my line work as well. So in fact, when I was finishing this image, I don't really know how much I was looking at the reference. At that point, I was creating an image. I started with a reference photo. I got all of the important parts in a general location, and then went over that with ink and started creating something from what I had on the surface. And I really enjoyed the process that went along with this one. There's more to this particular image. The reference, if you remember, there was an edge over here, there was an edge over here, there was a lamp post over here.
Like we were looking through an alley, really. At this
right.
Point.
There's more things I could have added to this image. And I think it's important to know that if I did this image again, it would look different from this image, and that's completely fine. I really enjoyed this process. I really am excited about doing this process again. I have, right now we're doing line and wash for the live lesson series. I've ordered a whole new line of watercolor paints. I've been using the Winsor & Newton Professional Cakes. I've now got tube paints. I am excited. This piece right here has kind of rekindled my love for watercolor.
All right,
which
that is big.
I love watercolor, but it's also frustrating sometimes. So it's kind of a love-hate relationship.
When they come out, they're so satisfying to look at,
right.
for years, because you would never do it the same way again.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
We got another super chat from A. Gerbil. Says, this channel is such a great resource. You two rock. And you rock. So thanks for the comment and for the support.
All right, we'll give that a cheer. See, Buddy asked, would this piece have worked if you had used green for the trees? Yeah, of course. But, if you'll remember, I chose to work with a very limited color palette. I used burnt sienna, burnt umber, ultramarine, and a little bit of burnt sienna. Did I already say burnt sienna?
You said burnt sienna.
Oh, a little bit of yellow ochre.
That's it.
Okay, so basically that is a full palette of colors if you think about it, because I've got yellow ochre, that's a yellow. I've got burnt sienna, we can consider that a red. And I've got ultramarine, we can consider that a blue. So that is really 3 primary colors.
Mm-hmm. Even if 2 of them are duller versions of primaries, they're still primaries nonetheless.
Right. So you ask if I would have used green, if this would have worked. Well, there is green in here, and it's created by optical mixing. I put down blue early in the process, and then I went back over these areas with yellow ochre, and that area right here, it is a very, very dull, earthy green that is reading because of the optical color mixing. Could I have used green from the tube? Well, I had kind of planned on doing that and then decided not to do it. Yeah, you can absolutely do that. You can add any colors that you want, but by limiting your color palette, it actually creates harmony and it makes your piece actually feel more natural.
Right.
It seems counterintuitive, but limiting your color palette is the key to creating harmonious images and also making images that look more natural and more interesting. So don't be afraid to limit your color palette. I say that, and through my head, I'm thinking about the lighthouse where I used all the colors. But especially with painting and watercolor, limiting your color palette is a good idea. Real quick, I like the structure of this piece. We've got this tall bell tower. Then we've got the space broken up by some horizontal elements. Then we've got some repetition down here in the trees. And then this line kind of pulls us into the composition. I really like the overall composition. This is another example where I felt like I needed some contrast against the building. So I just brought up a little bit of blue on both sides and let the viewer fill in the rest of the information with their imagination.
Matt, I think we started and ended the season with bell towers.
Isn't
Isn't that weird?
For whom the bell tolls.
And a lot of animals in between.
Right. A lot of animals in between and the bell tower. Okay. So now it is time for
favorites.
For you guys and us to pick our favorites from the season. So you guys can start telling us in the chat which one's your favorite, because It's 7:45 already,
Right, we gotta
and
hustle.
our next live show starts in just 16 minutes, and I've got to do some shifting and stuff, so we have to kind of do this a little bit quickly. But you guys let us know which one you think was your favorite. You can choose one from me and Ashley, or you can choose just one overall. It's completely up to you. And Ashley is going to pick his favorite of mine and one of his, and I'll do the same for him. So do you have your favorites?
I do. I've been thinking about it, and there's some tough choices on both sides of the drawing table this season. But I think for me, I'm going to go with Legozilla. I think I'm going to go with
Lego Man.
Yeah, that was a tough choice, but I think I'm going to go with Lego Man because he's so ridiculous and he's colorful and frightening all at the same time. So I love the ridiculous nature and the big feeling of the tiny little object. And then, so that's my favorite of my drawings of the season. And then my favorite of Matt's is it was the bell tower. It was the watercolor that he did just last week.
Okay.
So it was just such a departure, I think, from what we usually do and see on Gettin Sketchy. And I think I got excited because Matt was excited about it. So I think it pushed me over the edge. So nice job on that piece. And partly what I appreciated was all of the learning and teaching information around color theory that came with this lesson.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't even think about that really too much, but all right. For my favorites, see, my favorite of the season for Ashley, it really boils down to 3 of them. I really like 3 of them, and that is the cat drawing, the Lego Man, and the toothbrush. And I think I'm going to have to go with the toothbrush.
All right.
And
toothbrush gets a nod.
The reason why I think the toothbrush is so nice is because of the composition, because you created your own photograph, the variety of different textures, all the reasons we talked about, those intersecting lines that happen back there on the tile. You know, I am drawn to composition. If composition is strong, it really doesn't matter what the subject matter is. I'm a sucker, and I'm gonna like it.
Composition is king.
Yeah. So definitely, I think this is the strongest composition of all the pieces this season, and the toothbrush is my favorite. But Lego Man and the cat drawing are tied for second.
I think my students like the cat the best.
Yeah, I like the cat the best.
I think they really like that.
Yeah.
I think that toothbrush is going to get, I think I'm actually going to mat and frame that one and hang it up right in the room that I took the picture in, my bathroom. So I think it's going to go in there.
In case you forgot what the toothbrush looks like, here it is. Here's a drawing of it.
Right. And I'll look at it while I brush my teeth. It'll just be too extra every morning.
How ironic.
Yeah.
Okay, my favorite from the season for me, this is a difficult one. I really don't want to say this one because everybody else likes that one. I'm trying to be a contrarian, but really, I think this one is my favorite. But I really like the cardinal drawing. I know it wasn't the most popular one, but I like it.
Yeah, it's got a lot.
I really like it.
That bird's got attitude and character.
It's got attitude. It fades out. It's colorful. I like the paper that I chose to work on.
I like it as well.
I like that one, but I'm gonna have to pick the watercolor one. I'm gonna have to go with the crowd.
We agree on the watercolor, but all nice drawings. It was a good season overall, I think, with plenty of variety in our media choices this time.
Yeah.
I like Dale's comment. He says, "Composition is king, value is queen." That's good.
That is good, but I think value is king, composition is queen. We'll have an argument about that later, but yeah. All right, when does the next season start?
Next week? No, I'm just kidding.
We're going to take a few weeks off, and then we'll come back. If you want to know exactly when the next season, which will be season 13. Ooh, unlucky. I should have said that. We'll try to do something spicy for season
13's
13.
my lucky
We
number.
haven't done anything spicy in a while here for Getting Sketchy, so maybe season 13 will be the spicy one. We'll take a few weeks off. I haven't talked to Ashley about it yet, but probably no more episodes for definitely for the remainder of this month. We'll see about getting started maybe to the end of October, beginning of November. We'll
I think
see.
next Wednesday is already the first Wednesday of the following month.
Oh, okay. So there you go.
So definitely not anymore this month.
Yeah. Okay, so that will work out. Did I miss a super chat?
Oh, from
yeah.
Enrique.
Yeah.
We were. I'm sorry, Enrique. We were just jawing over here. It says thanks for the classes. I hope you return soon. And maybe drawing drapery. All right, I'll keep that in mind.
Okay.
Maybe we'll oil paint drapery.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe.
45 minutes.
All right. Well, guys, thanks for sticking around for the end of this episode, and thanks for joining us this season. If you missed any of these episodes, they're all available here on YouTube. In the next few days, I will have a post on the website that has all of the episodes together on one page with all of the drawings and all of the references and all of that stuff. It'll take me a few days to get that stuff up, but I will have it up as soon as I can possibly get it there. So you can check that out at the website at thevirtualinstructor.com. Make sure you like, subscribe to the channel, and if you're watching the recorded version of this, let us know in the comments below which one was your favorite from this season and any other comments or questions that you might have. With that, we're going to go ahead and sign out for this evening. We'll see the rest of you guys who join us for the live lesson in 9 or so minutes. Okay, 9 or so minutes. We're going to try our best to get things set up and get streaming. So we got to stop. We got to get out of here. All right. Good night, everybody. We'll see you next time.